He never noticed his maid until she appeared in a black dress, and he stumbled into an obsession that would destroy everything. Dorian Hayes sent his men to follow her that night, sat waiting in the darkness at 3 a.m. with a gun on his desk, and when she walked through that door, he realized the invisible woman who'd haunted his mansion for 8 months was about to become his greatest weakness. What he didn't know was that she'd witnessed his people kill someone 7 years ago, and his enemies had just figured out who she was. Dorian Hayes did not usually wait for staff, but that night, close to 3 in the morning, he sat motionless in the darkened study of his Chicago estate, with his suit jacket still on, his tie loosened, and his gun resting within arm's reach on the mahogany desk. The mansion was silent, security lights casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His team had retired hours ago. The negotiations with the rival families could resume tomorrow, but this couldn't wait. What he was about to discover would shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman who cleaned his floors. Autumn Sterling, his maid, the woman who had worked in his home for 8 months and somehow remained completely invisible to him, always moving through rooms like a shadow in her gray uniform. Auburn hair pulled back severely, hazel eyes carefully avoiding his, voice barely above a whisper when she spoke at all. She cleaned, she organized, she vanished into the walls of the mansion as if she were part of the architecture itself, until tonight. He hadn't intended to leave his office. He hadn't intended to walk toward the service entrance, but he did because something caught his peripheral vision that made his breath stop in his chest. A woman. A strikingly beautiful woman. Not the ghost who dusted his bookshelves. Not the silent figure who straightened his newspapers and disappeared before he could acknowledge her presence. A woman in a fitted black dress that hugged curves he hadn't known existed. Auburn hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the dim hallway light like burnished copper. Lips colored with something dark and inviting. Heels that made a confident rhythm against the marble floor. She stood near the staff exit, checking her reflection in the antique mirror by the door, adjusting a delicate silver bracelet on her wrist. Her posture was different, relaxed, alive. Nothing like the tense invisibility she wore like armor in his presence. It took Dorian 4 full seconds to realize who he was looking at. Autumn. But the transformation he was witnessing was only the beginning of what she'd been hiding. He stood frozen in the hallway's shadows, his hand still gripping the doorframe. She turned slightly, catching sight of him in the mirror's reflection, and her entire body tensed, as if bracing for punishment. But he said nothing. He couldn't. His chest constricted in a way that felt dangerously close to panic. His pulse hammered and rage mixed with something far more unsettling, something he refused to name. "Where are you going?" The words came out lower, rougher than he intended. She swallowed hard. Out? With who? Friends. The answer sent fire through his veins. He hated the dress. Hated that he'd never seen this version of her. Hated that she'd been hiding it from him. Hated that it mattered. When she moved past him toward the door, a trace of perfume, something floral and unexpected, replaced the usual scent of lemon cleaner and furniture polish he associated with her. She didn't look back. The door closed softly behind her, and her footsteps faded into the night. What Dorian did next would cross a line he could never uncross. Dorian pulled out his phone and sent a brief message to 2 of his most discreet men with a single instruction and no explanation. And now, hours later, he sat rigid in the darkness, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for her return. The clock read 3:07 a.m. when he heard movement outside. A key turned carefully in the lock. Autumn slipped inside, easing the door closed with the practiced quiet of someone who believed the household was asleep. She took 3 steps into the hallway before she saw him and stopped dead. Her eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't realize you were up this late." He cut her off, leaning forward in his chair. You said friends. That usually ends before 3 in the morning. Autumn straightened her spine. I'm off duty. What I do after hours isn't your concern. He rose from his seat. His height forced her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. It was the closest they had ever stood to each other. Her makeup was slightly smudged from hours of whatever she'd been doing. Her hair was windswept from the night air. Her cheeks were flushed with color. She looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. It made the anger sharper. You came back alone, he said, his voice tight. Yes. You shouldn't be walking alone in this city at 3 in the morning. She frowned. I've been doing it for years. Not anymore. Her arms crossed defensively. Why? He couldn't tell her the real reason. Not yet, because the truth would reveal just how obsessed he'd become. He didn't have an answer that wouldn't expose too much. Because you looked like someone else tonight. Because every man in that club watched you too closely, according to my men. Because I didn't know you could look like that, and now I can't stop seeing it. He settled for control instead of truth. You work in this house. That makes your safety my responsibility. She shook her head, frustration flashing across her features. This is control, not concern. He stepped closer, invading her space. Call it whatever helps you sleep. Just don't come home this late again. Her breath hitched, not from fear but from surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to sound territorial. Territorial. The word fit too well. The feeling burned like acid. Good night, Mr. Hayes, she whispered, moving around him and heading toward the staff quarters. He didn't sleep. Not for a single second. He kept replaying the images his men had sent him throughout the night. Autumn laughing with a group at a high-end nightclub. Autumn dancing with easy confidence. Autumn glowing in ways she never did within these walls. He resented every moment of it. But morning would bring a confrontation that would change everything between them. By morning, Dorian was seated at the breakfast table, coffee untouched, eyes locked on the doorway. He didn't understand why he felt restless. He didn't understand why the sight of her in that dress had affected him so viscerally. But he knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Footsteps approached. Autumn entered, not in her uniform, but in dark jeans, a fitted sweater, light makeup, and a leather jacket draped over her arm. Again. His jaw tightened automatically. Going somewhere? He didn't hide the edge in his voice. She nodded. Yes, it's my day off. Dressed like that? Her eyebrows lifted. What exactly is wrong with how I'm dressed? He didn't answer, because the truth was too simple and far too dangerous to admit aloud. Nothing was wrong with how she looked, and that was precisely the problem. The clock read 3:07 a.m. when Autumn Sterling slipped through the service entrance of the Hayes mansion, her heels dangling from one hand as she moved barefoot across the marble floor. She eased the door closed with practiced silence, the kind that came from 8 months of learning which hinges creaked and which floorboards betrayed movement. The household was asleep. Or so she thought. You said friends. The voice came from the darkness of the study, low and rough like gravel. That usually ends before 3 in the morning. Autumn's heart slammed against her ribs. She spun toward the sound, her eyes adjusting to find Dorian Hayes seated behind his desk, barely visible in the shadows. His suit jacket was still on, his tie loosened at the throat. He looked like he'd been waiting for hours. Mr. Hayes. She forced her voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I didn't realize you were up this late. Where were you? He leaned forward slightly, and the dim security lights caught the sharp angles of his face. Out. She straightened her spine, willing herself not to shrink under his scrutiny. With friends, like I said. Until 3 in the morning. I'm off duty. The words came out firmer than she intended. What I do after hours isn't your concern. But what neither of them knew was that someone else had been watching Autumn that night. Someone dangerous. Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his jaw that sent a warning up her spine. He rose from his chair with deliberate slowness, his full height forcing her to tilt her head back as he approached. They had never stood this close before. She could see the muscle working in his jaw, the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. "You came back alone," he said, his voice tight with something she couldn't name. "Yes. You shouldn't be walking alone in this city at 3 a.m. Autumn frowned, confusion mixing with rising irritation. "I've been doing it for years." Not anymore. The possessiveness in those two words made her breath catch. "Why?" she challenged, crossing her arms defensively. "Why do you suddenly care what I do?" He stepped closer, invading her space in a way that felt both threatening and electric. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and she watched something war behind his eyes. Something dark and dangerous that made her pulse quicken. "You work in this house," he finally said, his voice controlled but strained. "That makes your safety my responsibility." She shook her head, anger flashing hot through her chest. "This isn't concern, Mr. Hayes. This is control." His eyes darkened. "Call it whatever helps you sleep." Another step closer. "Just don't come home this late again." Her breath hitched, not from fear but from the raw intensity radiating off him. She'd never seen him like this. Unraveled, possessive, almost volatile. "Good night, Mr. Hayes," she whispered, moving around him toward the staff quarters, feeling his eyes burning into her back with every step. What Autumn didn't know was that Dorian had files on her. Files that would reveal a connection between them that went back 7 years. Dorian didn't sleep, not for a single second. He kept replaying the image of her in that black dress, the confidence in her stride, the version of Autumn Sterling who existed beyond his mansion walls. By morning, he was seated at the breakfast table, coffee untouched, eyes locked on the doorway like a predator waiting for prey. Footsteps approached. Autumn entered wearing dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and a leather jacket draped over her arm. Light makeup emphasized features he'd never properly noticed before. She looked nothing like the ghost who cleaned his home. "Going somewhere?" He didn't bother hiding the edge in his voice. She paused, meeting his gaze directly for once. "Yes. It's my day off." "Dressed like that?" Her eyebrows lifted. "What exactly is wrong with how I'm dressed?" Everything. Nothing. He couldn't find words that wouldn't expose too much. "Where are you going?" "Work." His jaw tightened. "You work here." The secret she was about to reveal would explain everything, and complicate everything. "I have a second job." She said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Bartending. I've done it for 3 years." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. 3 years. She'd been living an entire separate existence, and he'd been too blind to notice. "You don't need a second job. I pay you well. The money's for my sister's medical bills." Her voice remained calm, matter of fact. "Your salary covers rent and expenses. The bartending covers everything else." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. "How much do you need?" "Excuse me?" "I'll increase your salary. Double it. Triple it if necessary." The words came out harsh, desperate. "You don't need to work nights in some..." "No." The single word cut through his offer like a blade. "No?" He stared at her, genuinely shocked. People didn't refuse Dorian Hayes. "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Hayes." Her hazel eyes flashed with something fierce. I don't want your money. I want to earn it myself. You're being stubborn. I'm being independent. She adjusted her jacket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a shift in an hour. She walked past him toward the door. He watched her go, rage and frustration warring in his chest. Then he pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. One to his driver, one to Marcus, his head of security. Find out which club she's working at, he said quietly. Then bring the car around. Dorian was about to discover something that would make his blood run cold. Autumn wasn't just tending bar. She was being watched by someone from his world. 3 hours later, Dorian sat in the back of his SUV outside Eclipse, a high-end nightclub in River North. Through the tinted windows, he could see the entrance, the line of people waiting to get inside, the pulse of music bleeding into the street. You want me to go in first, boss? Marcus asked from the front seat. Dorian was already opening the door. No, I'm going in myself. He needed to see it. Needed to see her second life. The version of Autumn Sterling who smiled at strangers and moved through crowds without disappearing into walls. Needed to understand why the thought of her here, serving drinks to men who looked at her the way he couldn't stop himself from looking at her this morning, made his blood run cold with something that felt dangerously close to jealousy. Eclipse was everything Dorian expected. Dark, expensive, and crowded with Chicago's elite pretending to be dangerous, and its dangerous pretending to be elite. He moved through the throng with the kind of authority that parted crowds without effort, his eyes scanning the bar until he found her. Autumn stood behind the polished counter, and the transformation stole his breath again. She wore all black, fitted top, dark jeans, hair pulled back in a high ponytail that somehow made her look both professional and devastatingly attractive. She moved with fluid efficiency, mixing drinks, laughing at something a customer said, her smile bright and genuine in a way he'd never witnessed in his home. She looked happy, free. It made him furious. He watched a man in an expensive suit lean across the bar, saying something that made Autumn laugh again. The man's eyes traveled down her body with obvious interest. She didn't seem to notice or care, already turning to serve the next customer. But Dorian noticed. He noticed every lingering glance, every appreciative stare, every man who thought he had a chance. 2 hours passed like torture. He nursed a single whiskey in the shadows, tracking her movements, cataloging every interaction. When she finally disappeared through a door marked staff only, he didn't hesitate. He followed. What he was about to say would cross every line. But Dorian Hayes had never been good at staying within boundaries. The corridor was dimly lit and blessedly empty. Autumn stood at a small locker, pulling out her phone. She sensed him before she saw him, her body going rigid. Mr. Hayes. She turned slowly, shock and anger warring on her face. What are you doing here? Watching you work. He moved closer, boxing her against the lockers. Watching every man in that room look at you like they have a right to. They're customers. Her voice was tight. I'm bartending, not... This ends tonight. The words came out harsh. You quit. Now. Her eyes flashed dangerously. I already told you no. Then I'll buy the damn club and shut it down. Why? She pushed against his chest, surprising him with her sudden fury. Why do you care what I do? I'm just your maid, Mr. Hayes. I clean your floors and disappear into your walls like you prefer. This... She gestured around them. This is my life. The only place where I exist. You think I prefer you invisible? The confession escaped before he could stop it. She laughed bitterly. You've looked through me for 8 months. I was trying to. His voice dropped. Because looking at you was becoming a problem. The admission hung between them, charged and dangerous. Autumn's breath caught, her anger faltering into confusion. But the real reason Autumn had made herself invisible was darker than Dorian could imagine, and it was about to surface. "I need this job," she whispered finally. "My brother Holden. He has medical bills I can barely cover. I can't just quit because you suddenly decided to notice me." "Brother?" Something in his chest loosened slightly. "You said sister." "I have both." She looked away. "Holden's care is expensive. And before you offer again, no. I won't take your money. I've spent too many years hiding from men who thought their money gave them control over my life." The pain in her voice made him pause. "Who hurt you?" "It doesn't matter." She straightened her shoulders. "I made myself small, invisible, safe, and it worked until you started paying attention." He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near her face. "I'm not him, whoever he was." "Aren't you?" Her eyes met his, challenging. "You're standing here trying to control where I work, what I do, who looks at me." The truth of it hit like a gut punch. She was right. He was doing exactly what she feared. "I'm trying to protect you," he said quietly. "From what? Customers? Tips? My own independence?" She shook her head. "Go home, Mr. Hayes. This is my world. You don't belong here." She moved past him, back toward the bar, leaving him standing alone in the corridor with the uncomfortable realization that she was absolutely right, and that it changed nothing about how he felt. Dorian had no idea that his instincts were about to save Autumn's life. Because the threat he was sensing was very real, and it was closing in. Dorian returned to Eclipse the next night without announcing himself. This time, he came with purpose beyond jealousy. Something about the previous evening gnawed at him, an instinct honed through years of navigating Chicago's underworld. He positioned himself in a corner booth with a clear view of the bar and waited. Autumn worked with the same confident efficiency, unaware of his presence. But Dorian wasn't watching her. He was watching everyone who watched her. It took 40 minutes before he spotted the anomaly. A man in a dark coat, mid-30s, with the kind of forgettable face that spoke of professional training. He wasn't drinking, wasn't socializing. He sat at the far end of the bar with a single beer that never emptied, his eyes tracking Autumn's movements with methodical precision. Recognition hit Dorian like ice water. He pulled out his phone and sent a photo to Marcus with 2 words. "Identify immediately." The response came back in under 3 minutes. "Kane Ashworth, enforcer, works for the Volkov family." The Volkovs, Dorian's enemies, and what they wanted with Autumn would turn his entire world upside down. The Volkovs, Dorian's current rivals in the territorial dispute that had consumed the last 6 months. And one of their people was sitting in this bar, watching his maid with the kind of focused attention that meant surveillance, not attraction. Dorian's blood ran cold. He moved quickly, circling through the crowd until he reached the bar. Autumn saw him approaching, and her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "Not tonight," she started, but he cut her off. "When does your shift end?" "That's none of—" "When?" His voice carried enough urgency that she paused. 30 minutes. Why?" "You're leaving with me. Don't argue." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "There's someone here who shouldn't be. Do not look around. Just finish your shift and meet me at the side exit." Fear flickered across her face. "What are you talking about?" "Trust me. Please." The word felt foreign on his tongue, but her expression softened slightly. "Fine. 30 minutes." What Dorian was about to discover in his files would reveal a connection between him and Autumn that went back 7 years. A connection forged in violence and blood. Back at the mansion 2 hours later, Dorian sat in his security room with Marcus and Reese Bates, his most trusted lieutenant. reviewing footage his men had collected from Eclipse's security cameras over the past week. The pattern was damning. Kane Ashworth had been there 5 nights in a row, always watching Autumn, always leaving shortly after she did. "How does the Volkov family even know she exists?" Marcus asked. Dorian's jaw clenched. "That's what we're going to find out." He turned to Reese. "Pull every file we have on past operations. Cross-reference with anyone named Sterling." 20 minutes of searching produced a thin folder marked with a case number from 7 years ago. Dorian opened it, and his stomach dropped. There, buried in surveillance photos from a botched warehouse operation, was a much younger Autumn Sterling. She stood in the background of an image, partially obscured, clearly in the wrong place at the wrong time. The notation beside her photo read, "Civilian witness, unidentified, escaped before containment." "She saw something," Reese said quietly. "7 years ago, she witnessed something we did." Dorian's hands tightened on the folder. "And now the Volkovs know who she is. They're not watching her out of interest. They're marking her as leverage." Against him. The thought completed itself with sickening clarity. Somehow the Volkovs had connected Autumn to the Hayes organization, or worse, to Dorian himself, and identified her as a vulnerability to exploit. "Get her," Dorian ordered. "Bring her to my office, now." The truth was about to come out, and when it did, Autumn would have every reason to hate him. Autumn stood in Dorian's study 15 minutes later, still wearing her bar clothes, confusion and anger written across her face. "What is this about? You can't just drag me." "You're being moved to the East Wing tonight." Dorian didn't look up from the papers on his desk. "Reese will be stationed outside your door." "Excuse me?" Her voice went sharp. "I'm not being imprisoned in your house." "It's not imprisonment. It's protection." "From what?" She crossed her arms. "You're not making sense." He finally met her eyes, and whatever she saw there made her take a step back. "There are people watching you. Dangerous people. Until I know why and how to neutralize the threat, you stay in the secure wing." "No." The word came out flat. "I have a life, Dorian. I have shifts, responsibilities." "Your shifts are done. I've already called the club." He stood, moving around the desk. "This isn't negotiable." "Everything is negotiable." But her voice wavered slightly. "Tell me what's happening." "Not yet." He couldn't, not until he understood the full scope. "Just trust me." "Trust you?" She laughed without humor. "You've been controlling every aspect of my life for 3 days, and now you want trust? I'm trying to keep you alive." The rawness in his voice seemed to reach her. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "One night. Then you tell me everything." "Agreed." Reese appeared in the doorway, his expression professionally neutral. "The room is ready, boss." Dorian watched Autumn follow Reese toward the East Wing, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. He returned to his desk and opened the file again, staring at the photo of teenage Autumn, innocent and terrified, caught in the crossfire of a world she never should have touched. But Dorian had made a fatal mistake. The walls had ears, and Autumn was about to overhear something that would destroy everything between them. Hours later, he passed by the East Wing on his way to bed. Reese stood sentinel outside the door, as instructed. As Dorian approached, voices drifted through the heavy wood, his own voice, and Marcus's, coming from the study across the hall where they'd been reviewing files with the door cracked open. "The girl's name is in the Hayes family file," Marcus was saying. "Witness to the Riverside warehouse incident 7 years back. If the Volkovs connect those dots..." "They already have," Dorian's recorded voice replied. "That's why they're watching her." Dorian froze, realizing with dawning horror that Autumn could hear every word through her door. He moved quickly, but it was too late. The door to her room swung open, and Autumn stood there, her face pale with betrayal. "Hayes family file?" Her voice shook. "I'm in your files?" "Autumn?" 7 years ago. The warehouse. Her eyes widened with recognition and fear. "That was you. Your operation. I saw—" She pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh God, I saw your people kill someone." "It's not what you think." "You knew." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You knew who I was. You've known this entire time, and you brought me into your house, made me work for you." Her voice broke. "Was any of it real? Or was I just another asset to control?" "I didn't know," Dorian said desperately. "I swear to you, I didn't make the connection until tonight. 8 months ago, when you applied for the job, I never looked at your background that closely. I should have, but I didn't. I don't believe you." She backed away from him. "Everything you've done, the protection, the jealousy, the concern, it was all about covering up what I saw, keeping me close so I couldn't talk." "No." He reached for her, but she flinched away. The gesture cut deeper than any blade. "Don't touch me." Her voice went cold. "I want out. Out of this room. Out of this house. Out of your life." "I can't let you leave. Not with the Volkovs circling." "Then I'm exactly what I thought." She looked at him with hollow eyes. "A prisoner. Just another thing Dorian Hayes owns and controls." She slammed the door in his face, and Dorian heard the lock turn from inside. He stood there, hand raised to knock, knowing that anything he said now would only make it worse. Behind him, Reese cleared his throat. "Boss, I'll keep the door secured." Dorian nodded numbly and walked away. The image of her devastated face burned into his mind. He'd been trying to protect her, but all he'd done was prove every fear she had about powerful men was justified. Morning would bring a revelation that could either save them or destroy them completely. And time was running out. Morning brought no relief. Autumn refused to open the door or speak to anyone. Dorian stood outside her room for the 3rd time in 2 hours, jaw clenched. "Autumn, we need to talk." Silence. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be." He pressed his palm against the wood. "But there's something you need to know. There's someone inside this house feeding information to the Volkovs. Someone who knows your routine, your schedule, everything." A pause. Then, "How convenient." "Another threat to keep me trapped." "I'm not lying." He pulled out his phone and pulled up the security analysis Marcus had completed overnight. "We've been tracking digital footprints. Someone accessed my private files 2 weeks ago. Files they had no authorization to see, including the Riverside warehouse documentation." The door opened a crack. Autumn's face appeared, eyes red-rimmed but alert. "Who?" The traitor in Dorian's house was closer than anyone imagined, and his betrayal had put Autumn directly in the crosshairs. "Leo Wells. He's been on my household staff for 6 months. Low-level security, works the night rotation." Dorian handed her the phone showing Leo's employment record. "The Volkovs planted him here to gather intelligence. He's the one who identified you from the warehouse photos and sent your information to Kane Ashworth." She studied the evidence, her expression unreadable. "This doesn't change what you did. What your people did." "No, it doesn't." He met her eyes steadily. 7 years ago, we were moving weapons through that warehouse. A rival family sent someone to sabotage the operation. My men caught him, and things went wrong. You were working late at the restaurant next door, walked out at the wrong moment, and saw the aftermath. "I saw them shoot him." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I ran. I changed my name, moved 3 times, made myself invisible." "From Sterling to what?" "I was Autumn Montgomery. I became Sterling 2 years ago when I thought I was finally safe." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out there's no such thing." Dorian's chest constricted. "If I'd known who you were when you applied, I never would have hired you. Not because I wanted to silence you, but because bringing you into this house put a target on your back. The moment you entered my world, you became connected to me in everyone else's eyes. So this is my fault for applying for a job? It's my fault for not being thorough enough to protect you." He stepped closer. "But we can end this. Let me show you the file. Let me explain what really happened that night, and then let me deal with Leo Wells and the Volkov family permanently." She studied his face for a long moment. "If I agree, if I look at this file, what then? I'm still a witness, still a liability." "No." His voice went hard. "You're someone I care about. Someone I failed to protect 7 years ago, and someone I'm going to protect now, whether you trust me or not." Something shifted in her expression. She opened the door fully. "Show me the file." What the file would reveal about that night 7 years ago would change everything Autumn thought she knew. They sat in his study, the Riverside folder spread between them. Dorian walked her through every page, explaining the weapons deal, the rival family's interference, the confrontation that turned deadly. He showed her the internal investigation that followed, the reforms he'd implemented to prevent similar incidents. "The man who died was named Viktor Petrov," Dorian said quietly. "He was Volkov family. That's why they care about this after 7 years. They finally identified you as a witness and think they can use you against me, either for leverage or revenge." Autumn's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. "And Leo Wells? He's in the basement security holding. We took him into custody 2 hours ago." Dorian met her eyes. "What happens to him is your choice." "My choice?" "He violated your privacy, put your life at risk. You get to decide how we handle it." She was quiet for a long time. "I don't want him killed, but I want him gone. Far away where he can't hurt anyone else." Dorian nodded. "Consider it done." "Just like that?" She looked at him skeptically. "You'll just let him walk away?" "With enough incentive to never speak about any of this again, yes." He leaned forward. "I'm not a good man, Autumn. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to be better. For you, I want to be better." Her eyes searched his face. "Why me? Why does it matter what I think?" "Because you're the first person in 8 months who looked at me like I was human instead of a weapon." His voice roughened. "Because when you disappeared into the walls, I noticed. Every time. And I hated that I couldn't reach you." But Autumn's past held secrets of her own. Secrets that explained why she'd spent years making herself invisible. "I made myself invisible because a powerful man tried to control my life once before," she whispered. "After the warehouse, after I ran, I met someone who promised safety. He turned it into a cage. I swore I'd never let that happen again." "Who was he?" "It doesn't matter. He's gone now. Dead, actually." She looked away. "But the damage he did stayed." Dorian reached across the desk and took her hand carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise I'll never cage you. Whatever choices you make, wherever you want to go, I'll support them. Even if that means leaving?" The question pierced something vital. "Even then, though I'd spend the rest of my life trying to convince you to stay." 3 days of preparation. But nothing could prepare them for what the Volkovs had planned. The attack was coming, and it would test everything. 3 days passed in tense preparation. Leo Wells was handed over to federal authorities with evidence of his connection to the Volkov family. ensuring he'd spend years in prison with no ability to retaliate. Dorian increased security throughout the mansion, brought in additional trusted personnel, and worked around the clock to identify every potential weakness in his defenses. Autumn remained in the East Wing, but the door stayed unlocked. She ventured out occasionally, always with Reese shadowing her movements. Dorian caught glimpses of her in the library, the kitchen, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows staring out at the grounds. Each time his chest ached with the distance between them. On the fourth night, she appeared in his study doorway. He looked up from his paperwork, surprise flickering across his face. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Always." He set down his pen immediately, giving her his full attention. She entered slowly and sat in the leather chair across from his desk. For a moment, she just looked at him, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking about what you said, about noticing when I disappeared." He waited, afraid to speak and break whatever fragile thread she was spinning. "I made myself invisible because it felt safe," she continued. "After the warehouse, after the man who trapped me, I thought if no one could see me, no one could hurt me. I became the perfect employee, the perfect ghost. I thought that's what you wanted." "I wanted you safe," Dorian said. "But I never wanted you invisible. Not really." "The night you saw me in that dress, do you know what terrified me most?" Her voice wavered. "It wasn't your anger. It was that you finally saw me. The real me. And I didn't know how to handle being seen by someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Someone powerful. Someone who could destroy my carefully built walls with a single look." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I've spent years convinced that being seen equals being controlled. That if someone notices me, they'll try to own me." "I don't want to own you, Autumn." "Don't you?" She met his eyes. "You tried to stop me from working, followed me to the club, demanded I stay in your secure wing." "Because I was terrified of losing you," he admitted. "Not as an employee or an asset. As someone who matters. Someone who became essential before I even realized it was happening." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm so tired of being afraid, of hiding, of making myself small." Dorian stood and moved around the desk slowly, dropping to his knees in front of her chair so they were eye level. "Then stop. Be as big as you want to be. Shine as bright as you did in that club. I'll be right here, making sure no one tries to dim your light." "What if the Volkovs come?" Her voice broke. "What if they use me against you?" "Let them try." His voice went hard. "They'll discover exactly why people fear the Hayes name." She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing his jaw. The touch sent electricity through his entire body. "I don't know how to trust this. Trust you." "Then don't. Not yet." He covered her hand with his. "But stay. Let me prove it. Let me show you that being seen doesn't mean being trapped." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, the walls between them finally beginning to crumble. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." But Dorian carried a secret of his own. A memory from his past that explained why he understood her fear so well. That night, Dorian walked her back to the East Wing. At her door, she turned to him. "Will you tell me something true? Something you've never told anyone?" He considered lying, protecting himself, then decided she deserved the truth. "When I was 16, my father tried to teach me how to be ruthless. He put a gun in my hand and told me to shoot a man who'd betrayed our family. I couldn't do it. I aimed at the floor instead." He met her eyes. "He beat me unconscious for that weakness. Told me I'd never survive this world if I couldn't kill without hesitation. So I learned to shut down every soft part of myself. Became exactly what he wanted. Until you made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond survival. Autumn's eyes glistened. That's not weakness. That's humanity. Is it? His voice roughened. Because it feels like weakness when I'm terrified every second that something will happen to you. She rose on her toes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Dorian. He left her there, his cheek burning from her touch, and returned to his study where Marcus waited with new intelligence. The Volkovs were planning something, and whatever it was coming soon. Dawn would bring violence, blood, and a choice that would force Dorian to reveal just how far he would go to protect the woman he loved. The attack came at dawn. Dorian woke to the sound of breaking glass and gunfire. He rolled from bed, grabbed the weapon from his nightstand, and was moving before his mind fully processed the chaos. Alarms screamed through the mansion. His security team's voices crackled over the radio, reporting multiple breach points. His first thought was Autumn. He sprinted toward the east wing, taking stairs 3 at a time. Reese was already there, weapon drawn, positioned between Autumn's door and 3 advancing figures in tactical gear. Dorian dropped 2 of them with precise shots. Reese took the 3rd. Get her out! Dorian shouted over the gunfire. Use the tunnel system. Reese kicked open Autumn's door. She stood frozen in the center of the room, eyes wide with terror. What's happening? Volkovs! Dorian pulled her close, checking her for injuries. We need to move. Now. They ran through corridors Dorian knew by heart. Reese leading, Dorian bringing up the rear with Autumn between them. More gunfire echoed through the mansion. His security team was holding the perimeter, but the attackers kept coming. They reached the basement access. Reese opened the hidden panel, revealing the tunnel that ran beneath the property to a safe house 2 blocks away. Go, Dorian ordered. I'll cover your exit. I'm not leaving you, Autumn said. You have to. What happened next would happen in seconds, but it would change everything forever. A voice from behind them, smooth and cold. How touching. They turned. Kane Ashworth stood at the corridor entrance, flanked by 4 armed men. His weapon was pointed directly at Autumn. The infamous Dorian Hayes, Kane said with a slight smile. And his little witness. We've been looking forward to this reunion. Dorian stepped in front of Autumn, shielding her body with his. This is between your family and mine. She has nothing to do with it. She has everything to do with it. Kane's eyes glittered. She saw Victor die. She's the loose end we need to tie up. And killing her in front of you? That's just a pleasant bonus. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. Time seemed to slow. Dorian saw Kane's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw the trajectory that would take the bullet past him and into Autumn. Saw every possible outcome with crystalline clarity. There was only one choice. He threw himself forward, tackling Kane as the gun discharged. Fire exploded through his shoulder, but he ignored it, driving Kane backward into his men. Chaos erupted, Reese firing, Autumn screaming his name, bodies falling. In the aftermath of violence, Dorian would finally say the words that had been building for 8 months. When the smoke cleared, Kane lay on the ground, Dorian's gun pressed to his temple. The other attackers were down, either dead or incapacitated. Reese stood guard, his own weapon trained on the hallway. She is not just my maid, Dorian growled, blood seeping through his shirt. She is mine. And if you or anyone from your family ever comes near her again, I will burn your entire organization to the ground. Kane's eyes widened with genuine fear. Hayes, tell your bosses this ends now. The warehouse incident was 7 years ago. Victor made his choice when he attacked my operation. Autumn Sterling is off limits, permanently. He pressed the gun harder. Nod if you understand. Kane nodded frantically. Dorian stood, swaying slightly from blood loss. Get him out of here. All of them. Tell them if they want war, I'll give them war. But leave her out of it. Reese hauled Kane to his feet and marched him toward the exit. Dorian turned to Autumn, who stood frozen against the wall, her face pale. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I'm fine. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me." "Yes." He moved toward her slowly, aware he was probably terrifying her covered in blood. "I would do it again. I would do it 1,000 times." She crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and kissed him. Not gently, desperately, hungrily, like she was trying to prove he was still alive. He groaned against her mouth, his good arm wrapping around her waist and pulling her close. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, her hands framed his face. "You were never invisible to me either," she said. "I saw you every day. I saw past the ruthless crime boss to the man who leaves coffee out for his staff and remembers everyone's birthday and checks on his men when they're sick. I saw you, Dorian Hayes, and it terrified me. Why? Because I was falling for you." Tears streamed down her face. "And I didn't know how to fall for someone without losing myself." "You won't lose yourself." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "I promise you won't. Your shoulder can wait." He kissed her again, softer this time. "This can't." Above them, the chaos of the mansion slowly quieted. His security team secured the perimeter. Medical personnel arrived. But in that basement corridor, covered in blood and surrounded by the aftermath of violence, Dorian Hayes and Autumn Sterling finally let their walls crumble completely. 3 weeks later, Dorian would make a decision that would shock everyone who knew him, a decision that would change his life forever. 3 weeks later, Dorian sat in his lawyer's office signing papers that would change everything. Marcus stood beside him, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked. "Completely." Dorian signed his name with a flourish. "Distribute the territories among the family. I'm keeping the legitimate businesses, liquidating the rest." The Volkovs have agreed to the truce. Kane delivered the message clearly. Dorian set down the pen. "I'm out, Marcus. Completely." His lawyer, a distinguished man in his 60s, gathered the papers. "Where will you go?" "Wherever she wants." Dorian stood. "That's the point." He found Autumn in the mansion's library, curled in the window seat overlooking the grounds. She looked up as he entered, a smile lighting her face. 3 weeks had transformed her, no longer the ghost hiding in corners, but a woman who moved through spaces claiming them as her own. "It's done," he said. She stood, moving into his arms. "Are you going to miss it? The power?" "I'm going to miss the certainty," he admitted. "But I'm not going to miss the violence, the constant threat, the looking over my shoulder." "Where do we go?" He cupped her face gently. "That's your choice. You said you wanted independence. So choose. Anywhere in the world. I'll follow." She considered for a long moment. "What about somewhere quiet? Small town, maybe by the water? Somewhere we can just be normal people." "I don't know how to be normal." "Then we'll learn together." She kissed him softly. "I want a life where I'm not afraid, where you're not constantly protecting me from threats, where we can build something real." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet." Her eyes sparkled with possibility. "Maybe a restaurant? Maybe a bookshop? Maybe something completely different, but something honest. Something that doesn't require weapons and security and looking over our shoulders." Dorian pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "When do we leave?" "As soon as you're ready." "I've been ready since the moment you walked into my house 8 months ago." He smiled against her temple. "I just didn't know it yet." They had run from Chicago, from violence, from their pasts. But what they found in a small coastal town would be something neither had dared to hope for. The coastal town of Stillwater. Oregon barely registered on most maps. Population 3,000, one main street, a harbor full of fishing boats and tourists drawn by the promise of authentic small-town charm. Dorian and Autumn's bookshop sat at the corner of Main and Harbor, a converted Victorian house filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves, comfortable reading nooks, and the smell of coffee from the cafe counter they'd added in the back. Autumn stood behind that counter, laughing with a regular customer about book recommendations. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, no trace of the gray uniform or fitted bartending clothes from another life. Dorian watched her from the staircase, arms full of inventory boxes, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Peace. Contentment. Things he'd never imagined possible. She caught his eye and smiled, that brilliant, unguarded smile that still made his breath catch. He smiled back and continued upstairs to their apartment above the shop. They'd left Chicago in the middle of the night, just as they'd planned. Dorian had liquidated his criminal empire, distributed territories, and walked away from the only life he'd ever known. The FBI had been surprisingly cooperative once he'd provided testimony on several ongoing investigations. Witness protection wasn't necessary. He'd made too many allies over the years, and his exit had been peaceful enough that no one had reason to pursue him. Autumn's brother Holden was in remission, his medical bills covered by the small fortune Dorian had set aside before leaving. Her sister visited last month, shocked to see Autumn so happy, so vibrant, so completely herself. They'd chosen Stillwater because it was remote enough to feel safe and charming enough to feel like home. The bookshop had been Autumn's idea, a place that honored their shared love of stories and new beginnings. Dorian discovered he actually enjoyed the quiet rhythm of small-town business. Ordering inventory, setting up displays, chatting with customers about their reading preferences. No one in Stillwater knew about their past. They were simply Dorian and Autumn Hayes, the couple who'd moved from Chicago to open the bookshop, who volunteered at the community center, who walked along the beach every evening holding hands. But the question they both carried was this: could two people who'd lived in darkness truly build a life in the light? That evening, after closing the shop, they did exactly that. The Pacific Ocean stretched before them, endless and gray-blue in the fading light. Autumn leaned against Dorian's side, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power, the control, the importance?" "No." He didn't hesitate. "I miss the certainty sometimes, but I don't miss the person I had to be to maintain it." "Who are you now?" "I'm still figuring that out." He kissed the top of her head. "But whoever I am, I'm better with you." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with those hazel eyes that had haunted him from the first day, even when he'd been too blind to admit it. "I'm glad we ran." "Are you?" He studied her face. "No regrets about leaving your life in Chicago?" "My life in Chicago was hiding." She smiled. "This is living." He kissed her then, slow and deep. The ocean breeze cold against their skin, and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For protecting me. For letting me choose this." "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was drowning in that life, becoming more of a monster every day. You made me remember how to be human." They stood there as darkness fell, two people who'd found safety and love in the aftermath of violence and fear. The bookshop lights glowed behind them. Their home waited above. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future felt not like a threat to be managed, but a possibility to be embraced. What neither of them knew was that the future held something even more precious than safety. Something that would complete the family they were building. Autumn Sterling, now Autumn Hayes, was finally, completely, beautifully visible. And Dorian Hayes had become the man he never knew he could be. Someone worthy of her light. In the quiet coastal town where no one knew their names or their history, they built a life from scratch. Not perfect, but honest. Not safe, but free. And in that freedom, they discovered something neither had believed possible. A love without control, without fear, without the need to hide. They walked back to the bookshop hand in hand, their footprints disappearing into the sand behind them as the tide rolled in. Inside, Dorian locked the door and flipped the sign to closed while Autumn started up the stairs to their apartment. "I'm making dinner," she called over her shoulder. "Your turn to pick the music." He smiled, something he did freely now, and followed her up. Their apartment was small but warm, exposed brick walls lined with more books, a kitchen that smelled of herbs and coffee, windows that overlooked both Main Street and the harbor beyond. It was nothing like the sprawling Chicago mansion with its security systems and shadows. It was home. While Autumn chopped vegetables, Dorian poured wine and queued up an old jazz album. They moved around each other in the kitchen with practiced ease, a domestic dance they'd perfected over 12 months of learning how to simply exist together. "Holden called today," Autumn said, stirring pasta sauce. "His last scan was completely clear." "That's incredible." Dorian wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How's he feeling?" "Strong, happy. He's talking about going back to school." She leaned into his embrace. "He wants to visit next month." "Good. We'll take him fishing. Show him the lighthouse." Dorian pressed a kiss to her neck. Let him see his sister finally living. She turned in his arms, sauce spoons still in hand. "Do you think we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders? Wondering if someone from the old life will find us?" It was a question she asked sometimes, usually late at night when memories surfaced unbidden. He answered the same way every time, with complete honesty. "Maybe not entirely, but every day that passes we get further from who we were, and one day we'll wake up and realize we haven't thought about Chicago in weeks." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're building something new, Autumn. Something that's just ours." "Just ours?" she repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." They ate dinner at the small table by the window, talking about mundane, beautiful things. Inventory orders for the shop, a book club meeting Autumn was organizing, plans to repaint the cafe counter. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences. But Autumn had been carrying a secret for 2 weeks. A secret that would change everything once more. This time, for the better. Later, curled together on the couch with the ocean breeze drifting through open windows, Autumn's head resting on Dorian's chest, they watched the lights of fishing boats bob in the harbor. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. His hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused. "What is it?" She sat up, turning to face him. Nervousness and excitement warring in her expression. "I've been thinking about what comes next. For us. For this life we're building." "Okay." He waited, giving her space to continue. "I want more than just the bookshop. I want a family." The words came out in a rush. "With you. Someday. If that's something you want too." Dorian's breath caught. In all his years running Chicago's underworld, making life and death decisions, he'd never once imagined himself as a father. The idea had seemed impossible. What kind of father could a monster be? But he wasn't that person anymore. "I want that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Autumn. I want that more than I knew possible." Her eyes filled with tears. "Really?" Really? He pulled her close, cradling her face in his hands. I want everything with you. The bookshop, the family, the boring Tuesday nights and the ordinary mornings. All of it. She kissed him then, and it tasted like salt and promises, and the future they were claiming for themselves. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Autumn laughed softly. Look at us, the former crime boss and his invisible maid, planning PTA meetings and family dinners. Stranger things have happened. He grinned, though not many. Do you think... She hesitated. Do you think we'll be good at it? The normal life? I think we'll figure it out together. He kissed her forehead. Just like we've figured out everything else. That night, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the windows and the sound of waves in the distance, Dorian held Autumn close and thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. From that first confrontation at 3:07 a.m., to the violence and fear, to this quiet moment of peace. He'd given up an empire. She'd given up invisibility. And in return, they'd found something infinitely more valuable. Each other. Dorian? Autumn's sleepy voice broke the silence. Thank you for waiting for me that night, in the dark, even though I hated it at the time. He smiled into her hair. Thank you for coming home. Always, she whispered. I'll always come home to you. Outside, Stillwater slept. The ocean kept its eternal rhythm, and in a small apartment above a bookshop, two people who'd survived the darkness finally rested in the light. They were no longer defined by their past, by warehouses and gunfire, by gray uniforms and criminal empires, by fear and control. They were simply Dorian and Autumn. And they were, at last, free. Two people who began as strangers in a darkened mansion had found what neither thought possible. A love worth leaving everything behind for. A life worth living. And a future where the only thing that mattered was each other. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this.